Welcome back to these lectures on Indian writing in English, and today we are going to look closely at Raj Mohan's Wife by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. We had already spoken about the context and the way the text was produced in the last lecture. Today let's look at Raj Mohan's Wife a bit more closely. Let me summarize the novel for you. Rajmohan's Wife is about Matangini, around 18-year-old married to Rajmohan. So Matangini is Rajmohan's wife. Rajmohan is a harsh and abusive husband. Despite her oppressive marriage, Matangini remains compassionate and resilient. She shares a close relationship with her sister Hemangini, whose husband Madhav is her secret love interest. We will talk more about it as we go on and explore these subjects. Their lives unfold in this village called Radhaganj, which is in today's Bangladesh, or as it was thought of as East Bengal in those days. And in this village, Rajmohan is given employment by Madhav, who belongs to the land owning class. There is a criminal plot that Rajmohan gets involved in to rob Madhav, which is engineered by Madhav's cousin called Mathur. The entire plot is overheard by Matangini, who risks her own life to go and warn both Hemangini and Madhav, and in the process takes unusual risks and demonstrates a side of herself that is quite radical. Matangini's resilience or endurance, as we can say, through domestic violence and threats of abuse is quite exemplary. So, this novel elaborates and centers her struggles, but also it unfolds at the backdrop of social and political upheavals, family intrigue, and betrayals, all of those things. Interestingly, the novel does not posit the colonizer binary that starkly. The only white man's presence is only at the end of the novel, that of an Irish magistrate. We'll talk more about it. But the novel is about complexities of love, social norms, gender roles, critiquing the institutions of marriage and the oppression of women in colonial India, 19th century India. That's what the crux of the novel is. And it's very fascinating to read the first 3 chapters of the novel itself. A reminder that these were the 3 chapters that were back translated by Brajendranath Banerjee, as we understood in the last class, that the first 3 chapters, he found all the chapters produced in Indian field, but the first 3 chapters, which he back translates from Bankim's own translation of Rajmohan's Wife into English. So here, these 3 chapters are pretty interesting also from the point of view of translation, Indian novel as a translated entity, also to look at the reality of India being translated into a Western genre itself and the fashioning of the Indian novel. So let's look at the first chapter itself, right? It's called The Drawers of Water, and the description is drawn from Victorian realist novel. There is a small village on the river Madhumati. On account of its being the residence of wealthy zamindars, it is regarded as a village of importance. one Chaitra afternoon. Very important. Let's look at, and we are talking about translating Indian experience into a Western novel. We have first a word called Chaitra, a very Indian word which is talking about a specific month in the Indian calendar. It does not say a hot summer afternoon, it says a Chaitra afternoon. The summer heat was gradually abating with the weakening of the once keen rays of the sun. A gentle breeze was blowing. It began to dry the perspiring brow of the peasant in the field and play with the moist locks of village women just risen from their siesta. So, on one hand you have siesta, on one hand you have Chaitra, the kind of uh, amalgamation of Indian and the Western experiences and words themselves coming together, as you will see. More of that we will see here. It was after such a siesta that one of the characters of the novel arrives. Her name is Kanaka. The descriptions are drawn from the Kavya tradition. It was after such a siesta that a woman of about 30 comes in. She took very little time to finish the process usually and everything. It's a mock Kavya kind of an expression here. That's why the descriptions are of her ablution practices and everything. Then that some beetle leaves had dyed her lips. Now compare that with the description of the other character that we'll see, who is not Kanaka, who is the central figure, that's of Matangini. As you can see, if you compare that to the description of Kanaka, you will see that this is what Kavya description looks like for a protagonist. The dainty limbs of the women of 18 were not burdened with such abundance of ornament, nor did her speech betray any trace of the East Bengal accent, which clearly showed that this perfect flower of beauty was no daughter of the banks of Madhumati, but was born and brought up on the Bhagirathi in some place near the capital. We'll come back to this idea that what does it mean that she was not born in East Bengal, she was born near the capital, which we can assume would be Calcutta at this point of time. Some sorrow or deep anxiety had dimmed the lustre of her fair complexion, yet her bloom was as full of charm as that of land lotus, half scorched and half radiant under the noonday sun. Lotus being a prominent metaphor in Kavya tradition itself, we have that included here also. Her long locks were tied up in a careless knot on her shoulder, but some loose tresses had thrown away that bondage and were straying over her forehead and cheeks. Her faultlessly drawn arched eyebrows were quivering with bashfulness under a full and wide forehead. The eyes were often only half seen under their drooping lids, but when they were raised for a glance, lightning seemed to play in a summer cloud. You can see the kind of metaphor that is being built up here. We have the characteristic metaphors of the lotus, the cloud and lightning, all those natural metaphors that are invoked in a Kavya tradition, and the description of the lady itself in all her physical and sensuous beauty, with the hair being one very predominant element, right? Yet even those keen glances charged with the fire of youth betrayed anxiety. The small lips indicated the sorrow nursed in her heart. The beauty of her figure and limbs had been greatly spoiled by her physical or mental suffering, yet no sculptor had ever created anything nearly as perfect as the form half revealed by the neat sari she wore. The well-shaped limbs were almost entirely bare of ornaments. There were only chudis on the wrist and a small amulet on her arm. These two were elegant in shape. So, you can contrast this description with the description of Kanaka, and we can know who is the central figure here and who is not. That Kanaka is not exactly the protagonist here. But if you look at this Kavya description of of Matangini, the protagonist, and then you also see a very traditionally Victorian realist description itself. First, we were told about the weather, and if you look at this description here of the house itself, the arrangement of the house, and this invokes what Dean Mohammed was also trying to do in his own travels, when he would give examples and the spatial arrangement of palaces and places, that which house lined up which way and everything. That detailing comes from a very Western sense, empiricist kind of worldview. There were, and I'm looking at the text here, this is the third paragraph, I guess. Yes, this is the third paragraph where we are told about the house that Matangini stays in. There were 4 huts in the house which she entered. This is Kanaka entering. They had mud floors and bamboo walls. This kind of description is typically not available at this point of time if you are drawing from the Kavya tradition. This kind of focus on particulars, these kinds of focus on empirical detail to the T, as we will say, to very minute granular details, is something that we get, that Bankim is borrowing from the novel tradition in the West. They had mud floors and bamboo walls. There was no sign of poverty anywhere. Everything was neat and tidy. The 4 huts stood on the 4 sides of a quadrangle. Of these, 3 had entrances opening on the yard. The 4th opened outwards, and this last was the reception room, while the others, screened on all sides, constituted the zanana. And some brinjal and some salads were growing on carefully tilled plot of land in front of the raised terrace before the outer room. The whole was enclosed by a reed fence with bamboo gates, so the women could easily make her way into the house. So, we are given a description of a rural setting and a house there, that is in the rural parts of East Bengal on the banks of Madhumati river. Very interestingly, again, we had already seen the use of the word Chaitra. We now have 2 words more. One is zanana, another is salads that were growing. Very unusual that these words have been used here. Again, we need to remember that these were back translated by Brajendranath Banerjee. So, we are looking at a collaborative exercise here. Indian English fiction is born out of collaboration. It's born at the interface of periodical and novel. And from those kinds of variegated discourses, we also have different words now coming in. We have a word which is of Perso-Arabic origin, zanana. The word typically that could have been used at this point of time would have been antapura, which would have been the Bengali word for the inner rooms or the inner courtyard or the inner halls, in that sense, where the women inhabit. But he uses a Perso-Arabic word called zanana, which tells us a bit about Bankim's anxieties about his readership. The readership would be more proficient at this point of time, because we are looking at an educated class which would be reading this, which would be also proficient in English, and most likely the class which would be proficient in English would also be proficient at this point of time in Perso-Arabic idiom, because Persian was the court language before English becomes the court language. So, many of the writers at this point of time, many of the educated class in India in 19th century across regions are very familiar with Perso-Arabic words. So, and because Persian does not exist altogether from the Indian court and the bureaucratic setup, so one would think that that's the reason why we have a word called zanana that is being used here. Otherwise, he simply could have said inner rooms or inner courtyard or the inner halls itself. He could have simply said, but then he uses the word zanana, which also tells us that Bankim can feel the pressure of many competing forces also, many forces that are there. And you can also think how how Indian English writing at this point of time in 19th century is participant in a multilingual India. English does not exist autonomously sovereign in a sovereign way by itself. It gets mixed with other languages, and Indian English fiction is bound to inhabit some of those mixed corridors. So, as a result of that, we have the word zanana, chaitra. So you have words which are drawn from Sanskrit, we have tradition which are drawn from Sanskrit aesthetics, we have words that are drawn from local vocabulary, we have also words that are drawn from Perso-Arabic vocabulary, and then he goes on to write salads, which is a very unique word, and we will see fairly some more examples. If you are following the Meenakshi Mukherjee version as the one that I am using here, at the back of it you will have notes there where Mukherjee has outlined many of them and explicated them, that what exactly was he trying to do and how he mixed many realities together. And this is what I was talking about when we are talking about putting the Indian reality into the Western genre itself. So we have zanana, then we have an odd word called salads. It could have been like vegetables, very basically. So we may attribute salads to Brajendranath Banerjee's translation probably, but zanana is again used in the 5th chapter, which according to the version is from the original. So, and repeatedly zanana is used not only in the 5th one but also later. So we can safely assume that zanana is a word that is used by Bankim here. So one has to remember this fact about the multilingual existence of English in India. So one can see how Indian English novel is conducted. Let's move a bit forward towards the end of the chapter. Kanaka has come to Matangini to implore her to go out and fetch water from the river, and Matangini says that she is not allowed to go out and that Kanaka knows about this. We are already told from the description that we read of Matangini that she is already very sad and looks a bit depressed, and we are not told, we are just hinted that there is some kind of a problem that is there. So we are hinted that like some kind of a domestic problem is there. So then but then Kanaka is persistent and tries to ask her to come out. Let's read this section. It's a very important section because it kind of sets the tone for the novel. The young woman said firmly, which young woman meaning Matangini here, I cannot argue about it, Kanaka. You know my husband has forbidden me to fetch water and you know him well. So we are given a hint about who is this person called Rajmohan, that like he seems to be the harsh, patriarchal, typical husband who does not want the women to go out of the house. Kanakamai did not reply offhand. She quickly glanced round to see if anyone was coming. When she saw there was no one about, she stood there. She stood with her eyes fixed on the face of her companion as if wanting to say something, but she repressed this impulse from fear and remained musing with downcast eyes. The younger girl asked, What are you thinking about? If only you had eyes, replied Kanaka. The younger woman would not, however, listen to her, she made a sign to Kanaka to stop and said, "Hush, hush, I understand your meaning. If you have done so, what are you going to do now?" asked Kanaka. The younger girl remained silent for a while. Her quivering lips and reddening brow betrayed the preoccupation of her mind. A slight tremor in her limbs also showed how agitated she was. After some time, she said, "Let us go, but is it wrong?" One can see many suggestions that are being made. When Kanaka is trying to hint if she had eyes only, which basically means that if she could think beyond probably the household or think beyond Rajmohan, there is a suggestion that goes beyond the idea of monogamous marriage here. Already we can see there is some stress around this idea of marriage. We are told about the husband and we are told that the girl feels sad and provocated when Kanaka mentions about her domestic life, and probably there is a hint that there is some kind of sexual desire also involved, which we are not clearly articulated at this point of time. But then Kanaka does not keep it for long. Kanaka laughed and replied, "Wrong. I am not a fat-bellied Bhattacharya. We are talking about Kulin Brahmins here, as the note from Meenakshi Mukherjee would tell us. I have nothing to do with the Shastras, but I would have gone if I had 50 men." You can already see the provocations now moving from implicit hints towards very explicit evocations of sexual desire. Oh, what bravery, Matangini would say. 50, do you really wish for that many? Kanaka smiled sadly, because Kanaka is also someone, and the context being that Kulin Brahmins around this time in 19th century could marry people and then were into polyamorous and polygamous marriages. Kulin Brahmins could marry many wives in many different parts of their region. Kanaka being one of them, actually. She's married to a Kulin Brahmin, but then that person has left her and gone somewhere else. Kanaka smiled sadly and said, "It is a sin even to say so, but if all the 50 were of the same sort as the one given by me by fate, it would hardly matter. If I meet none, I am a chaste and devoted wife, even if I am married to a crore of men." You can already see the provocation. So, then empathizing with her, Matangini says, "The Kulin girl's lot," and then gets a picture, and then they go to the river itself. It's very important at this point of time to think about what Bankim is trying to achieve here and what Bankim is trying to hint at. One thing that Bankim is very crucially pointing out to is that the protagonist here, Rajmohan's wife Matangini, signals a dangerous excess, an excess that cannot be contained within domesticity, cannot be absorbed within the traditions that at this point in the traditional frame itself. So, there is a certain kind of an excess, there is a certain kind of a transgression that is bound to happen, and that happens when she steps out of the house. So, she has stepped out, she has transgressed, and this is the kind of a world that Bankim is interested in, because Bankim is thinking about, and that's why Sudipta Kaviraj calls him the unhappy consciousness, because he is not satisfied with the world that he inhabits at this point of time. Being the child of modernity, Bankim is looking at the position of women in traditional Bengali society and by extension the Indian society, and is quite ironic towards it, that there seems to be a hypocrisy, there seems to be a problem around the role of genders in Indian society at this point of time, and that's why his protagonist has already transgressed. They are ready to breach those foundations of the society itself.